Recall the most recent occasion you acquired knowledge that proved impossible to forget. It could have been comprehending the reason the sky appears blue, or discovering that every tree you observe originated from a small seed, or figuring out why ice stays afloat on water. After you grasped it, truly grasped it, you were unable to revert to ignorance. The intriguing part is that's not merely an expression. Your mind literally differs from its previous state. And at this instant, as these phrases connect with you, a comparable process is occurring. Let's begin with something simple. Your mind consists of roughly 86 billion nerve cells. That figure gets mentioned frequently. But what does it truly signify? Every one of those nerve cells links to numerous others, forming approximately 100 trillion links. These links, known as synapses, are the site of captivating events. They're not fixed, they're altering constantly, growing stronger with use, diminishing when neglected, even forming completely fresh rotes. This is where it becomes enthralling. Each instance you comprehend a novel idea, you're actually reshaping these links. It's no analogy. Researchers can quantify this. For example, when an individual masters juggling, brain images reveal expanded gray matter in regions managing visual and movement synchronization. Cease juggling for several months, and those alterations begin to diminish. The mind is perpetually molding itself according to its activities. But comprehending something, truly capturing a notion, does something distinct from merely acquiring an ability. It forms what we could term an irreversible shift. Consider visual deceptions. Examine one of those pictures that resembles a vase till someone highlights it's likewise two profiles facing one another. The instant you perceive both, you cannot disregard them. Your mind has established a fresh template of identification. The optical data remains unchanged, but your inner representation of the viewed object is broadened. This occurs due to the manner the mind handles data. It's unlike a machine that saves information in organized folders. Rather, it builds frameworks, templates of anticipation regarding the world's operations. When you face something novel, the mind doesn't simply log it. It attempts to integrate it within current templates. If it fails to match, the mind must undertake something tougher. It must reorganize those templates. That reorganization is what we feel as comprehension. Let's employ a basic illustration. Suppose you've never pondered why vessels float. You may possess a fuzzy notion that they simply do, possibly due to their form or composition of appropriate substances. But then somebody clarifies buoyancy. The vessel displaces liquid aside. And if the mass of that shifted liquid exceeds the mass of the vessel stays buoyant. Abruptly, you comprehend not only vessels, but why a metal pin submerges, yet a metal vessel remains afloat. Why you sense less heavy in a swimming area. Why ice mountains pose risks beneath the waterline. A single rule reveals numerous occurrences. That instant of comprehension entails multiple events transpiring in the mind simultaneously. Initially, there's template fulfillment. Various sections of the mind that manage diverse elements of the notion, optical, rational, dimensional, commence activating in harmony. This coordinated action fortifies the bonds among these areas. Next, there's forecasting. After you comprehend buoyancy, your mind begins instinctively forecasting outcomes in comparable scenarios. Observe a stone, it'll submerge. Observe a branch, could remain afloat, relies on the timber. This forecasting system operates continually in the shadows, owning your framework. But here's what renders specific revelations unique. They alter the inquiries you pose. Prior to comprehending buoyancy, you may ponder particular instances. Why does this remain afloat? Why does that submerge? Following comprehension, you commence posing alternate inquiries. What influences thickness? How do underwater crafts regulate their level? The revelation unveils fresh areas to investigate. This explains why certain concepts are labeled productive. They don't merely resolve queries, they produce fresh ones. There's a profounder dimension to this. Certain notions alter not merely what you know, but how you sense. Ponder the notion that all you observe is really from earlier. Illumination requires duration to journey. Thus, when you gaze at an item across the space, you're viewing it as it existed a few nanoseconds earlier. Gaze at the sun, and you're viewing it as it existed 8 minutes earlier. Gaze at a remote star, and you could be viewing illumination that started its voyage prior to humankind's presence on the planet. This isn't mere facts. It basically transforms how you consider the present. It discloses that concurrence, the notion that events occur simultaneously, is more intricate than it appears. After you capture this, you begin observing it ubiquitously. You recognize that during a discussion, you're replying to terms that were uttered milliseconds earlier. The current instant is slimmer than your cognition. This form of comprehension doesn't merely append data. It reorganizes your fundamental instincts regarding existence. The mind appears to possess varied forms of comprehension. There's superficial comprehension, where you can recite data or adhere to procedures without truly capturing the rationale. Then there's profound comprehension, where you can employ the rule in novel contexts, clarify it in varied manners, and perceive its bonds to additional concepts. The distinction between these isn't merely how much you know, it's how merged that knowledge is with the remainder of what you know. Ponder acquiring reading skills. Initially, symbols are merely forms. Then you discover that forms match to noises. Then that blends of noises create terms. Then that terms convey significance. But something captivating occurs as you rehearse. Ultimately, you cease perceiving symbols whatsoever. You merely perceive significance. The procedure turns instinctive, unseen. Attempt to gaze at a term in a tongue you can interpret, and not interpret it. You cannot. The comprehension has turned so merged into your mind's handling that it's no longer elective. This instinctiveness is potent, but it also signifies that genuinely comprehending something alters your unprocessed sensing, not merely your explanation. A composer listening to an orchestra detects elements a non-composer misses. Not because they're cogitating more intensely about it, but because their sensory mechanisms have been remodeled. They've educated their minds to instinctively identify templates, concords, and frameworks that others overlook. Now, here's where it links to this instant presently. The action of clarifying how comprehension modifies the mind is itself modifying your mind. There's a self-referential aspect to it. Recognizing that your mind reshapes itself as you acquire renders you more conscious of that procedure. And that consciousness can affect how you tackle acquiring. It's akin to realizing that you can sense your own pulse. The pulse was perpetually throbbing, but now you're aware of it. And that awareness can even impact the tempo. Certain brain researchers discuss meta-thinking, cogitating about cogitating. People appear to be exceptionally adept at this. Not solely do we acquire, but we can contemplate how we acquire, and we can employ those contemplations to acquire more effectively. This generates a reinforcement cycle. Comprehending how comprehension functions renders you more skilled at comprehending. It's a peculiar cycle, the sort that emerges in awareness itself. Ponder what transpires when you discover that recollections aren't static captures. Each instance you recollect something, you're rebuilding it. And in that rebuilding, you can really modify the recollection. This signifies that recollecting alters what you recollect. After you recognize this, you commence observing it. You detect yourself feeling doubtful about particulars. You identify when a recollection seems more like a narrative you've narrated to yourself than an immediate encounter. The awareness modifies your connection with your own history, or consider the notion of mental prejudices. Acquire knowledge about affirmation prejudice. The inclination to observe proof that bolsters what you already trust and disregard proof opposing it, and you commence detecting yourself engaging in it. Not invariably. The prejudice doesn't vanish merely because you recognize it, but occasionally you'll be in a debate and abruptly cogitate. Hold on, am I merely seeking justifications to be correct? That instant of identification is your mind employing its framework of itself to verify its own procedures. It's akin to possessing a reflector that displays you not merely your visage, but your countenances as they develop. The mind's adaptability, this capacity to reshape itself, isn't boundless. It's simpler when you're youthful. Youngsters acquire tongues, melodic tools, and intricate abilities with a smoothness that grown-ups frequently covet. This is because juvenile minds are in an elevated condition of adaptability. The bonds are developing swiftly, and the frameworks are still pliable. But adaptability doesn't vanish with maturity. It persists throughout existence. It decelerates undoubtedly, and it demands more exertion, but it's perpetually present. Individuals in their 70s and 80s can acquire fresh tongues, adopt tools, command novel abilities. The mind never completely ceases being capable to alter. What does alter is productivity. Juvenile minds are investigating, creating numerous bonds, attempting varied templates. Grown-up minds are more focused. They've retained the bonds that demonstrated beneficial and trimmed away the ones that didn't. This focus renders grown-ups superior at matters they recognize, but more gradual at acquiring entirely novel matters. It's a compromise. You acquire proficiency but forfeit some pliability. But here's an intriguing reality. Specific kinds of acquiring appear to sustain or even enhance adaptability. Acquiring itself could maintain the mind more adaptable. There's proof that individuals who routinely acquire novel matters, who persist testing themselves with unacquainted abilities or notions, sustain mental pliability longer. The mind regarded as an acquiring entity remains an acquiring entity. Employ it or forfeit it, as the proverb states, but the employment here particularly signifies employing it for acquiring, not merely for acquainted duties. This raises a captivating query. What's the ideal method to organize acquiring if you desire to authentically comprehend something instead of merely commit it to memory? The studies indicate a few guidelines. Initially, interval. Acquiring a small amount across numerous meetings functions superior than stuffing all into one meeting. The mind appears to solidify comprehension during repose, especially during slumber. When you acquire something, then slumber, then return to it, the bonds have had duration to steady. Next, recovery. Examining yourself, attempting to remember data fortifies comprehension more than merely examining it. This is unexpected because recovery seems tougher and examining seems simpler. But that challenge is really the essence. When you labor to remember something, you're compelling your mind to fortify those rotes. Simple duplication doesn't produce the identical outcome. Third, linkage. Comprehension intensifies when you link novel data to matters you already recognize. This explains why comparisons function so effectively. They take something unacquainted and connect it to something acquainted, forming a span that your mind can traverse. After the span exists, the novel notion turns component of your merged awareness system instead of a detached reality. There's likewise the matter of concentration. Comprehension demands concentrated concentration in a manner that surface handling doesn't. This is more significant now than ever because concentration is progressively divided. Perpetual disruptions, alerts, rapid changes between duties. These all obstruct the type of continuous concentration that profound comprehension demands. The mind requires duration to immerse into an issue, to experiment with it, to permit varied areas interact and discover templates. Disruptions shatter this procedure. But when that procedure succeeds, when comprehension snaps into position, there's frequently a sensation of contentment, occasionally even delight. This isn't merely mental. The mind liberates dopamine when templates are identified, when forecasts prove precise, when comprehension arises. This incentive mechanism promotes acquiring. It's why enigmas can be habit-forming, why resolving a challenging issue feels pleasant, why that eureka instant is enjoyable. The mind is basically incentivizing itself for improving at representing the world. And here's something valuable to contemplate. The world you encounter is your mind's representation of the world, not the world proper. Illumination strikes your eye surfaces, but you don't perceive the electric impulses in your visual pathway. You perceive items, hues, motion. Acoustic waves strike your ear membranes, but you don't auditor vibrations. You auditor terms, tunes, significance. The mind acquires unprocessed sensory input and builds an encounter. That encounter is extraordinarily adept at corresponding actuality. Adept enough that you typically don't observe it's a fabrication, but it is. This signifies that when you intensify your comprehension of something, you're not merely appending data to your cerebral collection. You're really altering the world as you encounter it. An individual who comprehends musical principles hears tunes differently than somebody who doesn't. An individual who comprehends mechanics views movement differently. An individual who comprehends behavior science deciphers conduct differently. The outer actuality hasn't altered, but the encountered actuality has. This explains why instructing can be so influential. When you clarify something to another person and they authentically comprehend it, you've literally modified their encountered actuality. You've provided them a fresh method of perceiving. And frequently clarifying something compels you to comprehend it superior yourself. You must discover the appropriate terms, the appropriate comparisons, foresee perplexities. This procedure refines your own comprehension. Instructing and acquiring aren't distinct. They're both types of mental reorganization. Now, observe what's transpired throughout these previous minutes. Diverse notions have been clarified. Brain adaptability, template identification, the fabrication of sensing, the merging of awareness. But beyond that, a viewpoint has been presented that comprehension isn't inactive absorption of data, but dynamic rebuilding of cerebral frameworks, and that this rebuilding is tangible, quantifiable, genuine. If this viewpoint resonates, if it's snapped into position, then something has transformed, not merely fresh realities appended to prior awareness, but a fresh structure for cogitating about awareness proper. This is what specific revelations do. They supply not merely resolutions, but fresh structures for producing resolutions. They're instruments for cogitating. And like any instrument, once you possess it, you employ it instinctively. You don't cogitate, now I'll implement my comprehension of buoyancy, when you ponder whether something will remain afloat. You simply recognize instantly. The comprehension has turned component of how you sense. So when the heading proposed that following viewing this, your mind won't be identical. It wasn't exaggeration. The bonds that were in your mind prior to these phrases are not the same as the bonds that are now. Some synapses have fortified. Some templates have developed or intensified. The alteration could be minor, could be transient if the notions aren't reviewed, but it's present. It's quantifiable in theory if we possessed thorough enough images. But past the instant neural alterations, there's the potential of something more enduring. If the central notion echoes, if it turns component of how you cogitate about acquiring and comprehending, then it will affect upcoming acquiring. You could devote more concentration to instance when comprehension snaps into position. You could observe the distinction between committing to memory and authentically capturing. You could tackle challenging notions with more endurance, recognizing that comprehending requires duration and that the mind needs to construct fresh frameworks. These alterations in method could accumulate over duration, rendering you more efficient at acquiring, which renders you acquire more, which renders you superior at acquiring. Another reinforcement cycle. There's something deep in realizing that you're perpetually in the center of this procedure. You're never completed comprehending. There's no instant when your mind ceases being adaptable, ceases reshaping itself in reply to encounter. Each discussion, each volume, each perception is possibly altering the framework of your cogitations. Most alterations are minor, transient, but some are notable. Some authentically transform how you perceive all else. And here's the intriguing aspect about these notable transformations. You frequently can't completely comprehend them until following they've transpired. Prior to acquiring, that illumination possesses velocity, and that signifies perceiving is perpetually perceiving the history. You can't entirely envision what that comprehension will sense like prior to capturing how recollections alter when recollected. You can't foresee how it will alter your connection with your history. The comprehension must reorganize your cogitating before you can cogitate from inside that reorganized structure. This signifies that acquiring, genuine acquiring, perpetually entails a jump into something you can't completely foresee. There's a component of faith. Faith that the perplexity will dissipate, that the components will ultimately assemble together, that the mind will perform its task of template discovering and merging. And generally, if you persist with it, it does. The perplexity dissipates, matters make sense. Not entirely at once, generally, but progressively. And then one day, you recognize you comprehend something that once appeared incredibly intricate. The mind is competent of this because it's not a rigid device. It's a vital system that forms itself in reply to the world. It's constructed, if that's the appropriate term, to acquire. That's its main role. Not preserving data, though it performs that. Not handling input, though it performs that also. But acquiring, adjusting, refreshing its frameworks, improving at forecasting and comprehending. This is what minds perform. And so, having navigated through these notions, having pursued the reasoning from synapses to sensing to comprehending to alteration, what's the conclusion? Maybe it's this. Be aware of what you subject your intellect to, what you rehearse, what you contemplate about, because all of it is forming the entity that performs the encountering. The mind you possess tomorrow will be distinct from the mind you possess today. The sole query is how it will be distinct. and whether those distinctions will benefit you. You're perpetually evolving into someone marginally distinct. The world you encounter is perpetually being rebuilt. Comprehending this doesn't halt the procedure. Nothing can halt it, but comprehending could provide you some influence in the path, and that in itself alters